And then a Revolutionary Guard said to me, you know, he said, we're winning, you see. And I said, well, you tell me, we're going to capture Basra. They never captured Basra, but they said they were going to. And again, this was blisteringly hot, you know, you were talking about 33 degrees and dripping perspiration. And, you know, we didn't carry flak jackets or anything. People were being hit around us. And one little boy had a Quran. He took his helmet off. He was about 12 years old and held up his Quran to show he wasn't frightened of shellfire. He wasn't frightened of dying. And this Revolutionary Guard came up to me and he said, I can prove we're going to capture Basra. As I said, they never did. And I said, how do you prove? He said, come with me. So I climbed down from his truck and we ran, and there were shells bursting all around us in the sky. And he suddenly took me through this sort of trench of earth, and on the other side was nothing. We were in front of the Iranian front line, and there were bullets going into the earth all around us. And he said, Mr. Robert, can you see that building on the horizon, you see? And yes, I can see it. He said, that's the Sheraton Hotel Basra. And I said, okay, I've got it. I've got it. I believe you. So that's what the Iranians would do. They were prepared to have you killed if necessary. If you got killed, that was bad luck. But you see, over and over again, I would say to the Iranians, I want to go right to the front line. I don't want to see distant puffs of smoke and be told what's happening. And they kept their word, and it was the front line. There was no doubt about it. There were dead people all over the place.
But I'm assuming you are aware of the risk you are taking when you go with them.
Well, yes, and of course, when you've been the first time, you know what the second time is going to be like. You know, I think that whenever I've gone into a war, which I've done many times, I take the view that my job is to report it, not to die. Yes. And you have to go with that in mind. Mm-hmm. And when you feel panic coming, you have to use your fear to use your brain, not run around. If you run around like a chicken, you'll die. You'll do something ridiculous, and no one's going to save you. But after a while, you do develop a sixth sense. You decide, well, those soldiers look indisciplined and frightened. This guy knows what he's doing. That's an outgoing shell. That doesn't matter. That's an incoming shell. It's being fired from over there, but they can't see me because there's a trench in front of me. You work it out like a soldier does. I mean, you're not a soldier, but you think like it. But sometimes you get to a point when, in 24 hours under fire constantly, you're wondering if you can take much more than 24 hours, you know. And soldiers have to. I don't. But it's always different. You know, if you're in Lebanon, you're traveling to South Lebanon, there's a bombardment, then there are Israeli aircraft bombing the road around you. That's completely different to being in a trench in the front line in the Iran-Iraq war. And you know, people react differently to it. Some journalists don't go near it. They're the intelligent ones. Yeah. Some go a little bit and then say they've been there. Others go into wars and come out and they're too frightened to write. That's probably me. Yeah. But at least I see what's happening, and I do write about it. I remember once in Lebanon, I went to a big gun battle in Tripoli. Very recently, it was the Lebanese army against some Al-Qaeda groups who had hidden in an apartment block. And I got up there and they were shooting out of the building, and the Lebanese army were going to go in and storm it. They did. And just before they went in, an officer came up to me. He said, Robert, how are you? He knew me. He said, listen, do you want to come in with us when we go in? And I heard a voice say, yes, oh yes, 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 you know. And actually I couldn't say no, because this guy had invited me to his wedding some months before, so he was a personal friend. And, you know, if he says, come with me, you go, you know. And we approached this building, and there was a guy. He was wounded, but he pulled up a gun to shoot at the soldiers around me. He hit one on my left who fell down. And then a soldier shot him in the chest and he fell backwards. And they stormed up the stairs. There was all this water coming down the stairs and civilians in the apartment block screaming and trying to escape. And we got up to about the 6th floor, and all the cars in the parking lot below were on fire. And we walked in this room, and we ran into a room. I was behind the first 3 soldiers. I wanted to see everything. And there was a guy pulled up a Kalashnikov, and a soldier shot him, and he fell backwards right through the window into the burning parking lot. And we came back downstairs. Everyone was drenched in water because all the, you know, the water tanks at the top of the building had been hit. And we got down to the bottom, and the man who'd been shot originally was trying to stand up with his gun and shoot again. And a soldier threw a hand grenade at him and blew his right arm clean off right in front of us. And he fell back dead. And I remember sitting down in the street, and I couldn't write. I was so frightened, I was shaking. And I got in the car and I went back to Beirut, and I walked into the internet cafe. I don't use the internet, but they set it up and I would write my story. And I sent it off to London. It was 900 words, 1,000 words. It was about, you know, I didn't do it in any sort of heroic way, like, you know, Mr. Robert is crazy. I just said what I saw and what it was like. And I called London afterwards to make sure they'd got the report. And they said yes. And I said, look, I'm sorry, it's not written in the normal Fiskery, you know, it's my kind of style. It's not very literary. And they said, no, you were obviously very frightened, and that's why we haven't touched it. We're going to print it exactly as you wrote it. And of course, weeks later, readers' letters arrived saying, you know, we understood exactly what was happening. But every episode like that is different. And afterwards, you are, or you should be, profoundly lucky you survived. Didn't even get hurt, you know.
But you know, there's a common critique among foreign correspondents working in the Middle East and including the Arab countries, that they don't have access, they don't give access to foreign correspondent.
Sorry,
the official.
I don't understand your question.
I mean, they complain that
who complains?
the foreign correspondent,
right,
that the officials in the Middle East and including many Arab countries,
of course, yeah,
they do not give you easy access. They don't have the facilities. Most of the time they put difficulty and obstacles.
Well,
based on what you are telling me now, you seem to have a lot of access.
And some wars we did, particularly in Lebanon, because in Lebanon they don't have the facilities to stop you moving around. One of the big problems for the Israelis in 1982 is that they wanted to censor the press and control them coming up from Israel. But the Lebanese couldn't censor or stop us, and we were going backwards and forwards across the front line between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So you had this odd situation with all these Western reporters with the Israelis being told, you can't go there, you can't go here, you can talk to him, you can't talk to him. And I was wandering around. After all, I'm a resident of Lebanon, I'm allowed to go anywhere I want, up to the Israeli front line, talk to soldiers, go back, drive the other side. And I had much more freedom to report than journalists who were working on the Israeli side of the line. But I was also there, of course. I was going to Israel. I was talking to Israeli officers and interviewing them during the bombardment. I mean, you know, the Iranians, for example, once they took you to the front line, you saw it all. But sometimes you'd have to wait for a week in Tehran because, of course, they wanted to take you when they just managed to capture more land. They didn't want to take you to show you a defeat. Occasionally we got there and they were suffering a defeat as you arrived. And that happened to the Iraqis. That was just bad luck on them. But, you know, by and large, when armies think they're winning, they're very easygoing with you. Yes. When they think they're losing, all kinds of barriers are put up to stop you getting to the front line. But in Lebanon, for example, you can always get through. You can always get down there.
Yeah, but I assume partly because in Lebanon there is very little government.
Well, in war, that tends to be the case. Nowadays, because the Lebanese have grown used to wars, they want the reporters there. And by and large, you see, in the Middle East, particularly in the Arab world, although on the one hand, most newspapers, local papers, are heavily censored, there are all kinds of elements to covering a story, particularly if it's violent, which are much easier in the Arab world than they would be, say, in Europe or America. One of the most obvious examples, which always stuns me, even after all these years, is that if you go, for example, if there's been a shooting in America or some violent incident in Europe, if you go to the hospital, you'll be kept 100 meters away by policemen, and you're treated as a vulture trying to prey on the sorrows of dead and wounded people. If you turn up in the middle of a battle to a hospital in Sidon, for example, in Lebanon, the first thing they do is take you to the head doctor who gives you coffee. And the second thing they do is say, which ward do you want to go to? Which patients do you want to see? And they'll, amazingly, it's happened many times, they'll say, well, you know, this young woman is probably not going to live, but she'll talk to you. Do you want to talk to her? And there you are in the Muslim world talking to a woman who probably won't survive her wounds. And she's telling you what happened to her. And her family who sit round her want you to be there. And they thank you for coming because they want you to record their suffering and say, it was not for nothing. The world knows what happened to us.